Horror was first.
And there was 3 different guys dressed like Slash.
And the lady's pounding on the door. I know you're in there.
Happy Halloween, kids.
The scariest thing that ever happened to me on Halloween really was when I was a little kid. We'd gone out trick-or-treating and we had this really great sort of scary haunted house sounds record that my dad had picked up, and he turned off all the lights in the apartment. And so when we came home, he had this record on. And as a little kid, I was probably 6, 7 years old, to hear this really well done sort of werewolves and ghosts and all this kind of chains rattling and all this shit, and you walk into a dark apartment, and I'll never forget that. It scared the shit out of me.
Corey Taylor of Slipknot, what came first for you, horror or heavy music?
It was horror, actually. It was my mom took me to see the Gil Gerard Buck Rogers movie when I was a kid, right? I must have been 4 or 5. But the trailer before the movie was John Carpenter's Halloween. You just got these incredible visuals, this sense of it's autumn, it's Halloween, and there's just this dude in the background of every shot. And I can remember as a 5-year-old just being transfixed and just like I suddenly didn't care about Buck Rogers. I think it was the one moment in my life that really galvanized my taste in what my young mind thought was cool, man. It was actually a couple years later that I actually got to watch it, and to this day is one of my favorite movies.
You made your debut with the Misfits at their annual Halloween performance at New York City's Irving Plaza.
Correct.
That's a hell of a place to start your career.
Yeah, when it was Halloween, so everybody had a fucking costume on. Giant dick, Gumby. it was really crazy.
In your opinion, what's the greatest film of all time, horror film, with the word dead in the title?
I mean, I'm a really big fan of Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I really, for some reason, I saw that movie at just the right time. You know, I was in high school. I mean, the movie had already been out maybe a year or so, so it wasn't, you know, but it was never playing anywhere I could see it. And it was at a midnight screening, like for one night, and I went to see it, and it was just blew me away. I mean, the crowd was so rowdy, and it was like a shitty theater and a bad place, and it just stuck with me forever, so maybe that's it.
Cool. The original Dawn of the Dead.
Silliest Halloween story is going to Halloween parties and finding guys dressed as you at them. That's pretty funny. There was one recent, I guess it was the year before last, I went to a Halloween party in Hollywood, and I went with my wife and a bunch of her friends, and we went into this one hotel room and hung out, and there was 3 different guys dressed like Slash, and then there was this one guy dressed like Slash and with his girlfriend named looked like Axel. And they were, you know, and they insisted on talking to me the entire time. And we were stuck in this room because we had friends there and there was no escape. And so embarrassing, but true.
We have a Halloween story, yes.
I think the most scared I've ever felt was the first time I went to a haunted house.
It was in Indiana when I was growing up. I was young.
We're going to get spirited. We got this show on Halloween. We're going to dress up as Kiss.
In Kansas City, we have this whole area that was flooded back in, I think, early 1900s, don't quote me.
There was this old lady that lived down on the corner, and she was really like psychotic, mean old lady.
We somehow convinced the makeup artist assistant with the Kiss entourage to give us some of the makeup that Kiss actually uses. We were very excited about this.
And so it's basically just a bunch of buildings called the West Bottoms, and they put a bunch of haunted houses down there.
So my friends and I, we would take like tomatoes and eggs and start bombing them at our house during the Halloween season. And one time I was out there and I threw some stuff at her house.
The makeup was so thick that it just started getting everywhere.
It was everywhere.
And then it started getting in my microphone.
I just remember being a girl and going with like 5 or 6 other girls and us all just like giggling and then also being horrified at the same time.
And my mom, I noticed as I was throwing stuff at her house, she pulled up to our house, and I'm like, oh man. So I ran home, and then that lady ran out of her house as fast as she could for being an older lady and was storming up the hill after me. And then I run in my house. I'm like, Mom, that lady's coming up here. You got to help me.
And like halfway through the set, I couldn't hear my voice, and I was really getting pissed off.
And anytime you forget, anytime you have that makeup on, you go like this, it's over.
Yeah, so those were pretty legit haunted houses down there.
So my mom got so freaked out that she and I went into the bathroom and hid, and the lady's pounding on the door. I know you're in there. So that's kind of my Halloween story, but my mom actually was an enabler.
You couldn't touch your face. It was everywhere.
Yeah, we just didn't know how to deal with that.
So,
and it was just such a drag.
I have a lot more respect for those guys for doing that for 40 years with that on.
Yeah.
Because that's not easy.
That's our great Halloween story.
Can you talk a little bit about your love of comics and horror and sci-fi growing up?
Horror was first. I was already watching horror movies, I think, before I could read. In New York City growing up, we had this thing called Creature Feature and another thing called Chiller Theater that were on the local channels. And they would play like old Universal movies and stuff like that.
I was going to ask about Universal Classic Monsters. Do you have a favorite?
It's between Wolfman and Creature from the Black Lagoon. I love all of them.
What is the greatest horror movie weapon of all time?
Weapon? Well, I mean, I think really a chainsaw, because think of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, who would even think, what did a chainsaw mean? It was just a tool at the hardware store that nobody cared about. And then, Toby took it and made something phenomenal with it and changed the complete meaning of this product that had been there forever. So I think that's probably the best one.
I have a terrible Halloween story. I cannot smoke weed. Physically. I am allergic, I suppose, and I've known this my whole life. The first time I ever tried to smoke weed when I was younger, I immediately vomited. So I literally I just cannot. So it was Halloween a couple years ago, and I was dressed up in this, I got an Adam West Batman costume, so it's like skin tight Adam West suit, and we were at a buddy's house. We were, going out and drinking and partying all night and whatever, and we went to his house, and everybody was smoking weed. And I thought, man, it's Halloween. Like, that probably is just shit I'm making up in my head. Like, I can probably smoke. I'll do it. It's going to be totally fine. Now, bear in mind, again, skin-tight Batman suit. I've misplaced the mask now, so I'm just, weirdo Mohawk guy. I had a full, long Mohawk at the time with a skin-tight bat suit with no shoes on, so it's just, little feet. And so, of course, I walk over and I smoke weed, and I'm like, oh, that was all right. I don't really care for it, but, at least I know I can do it now. We walk downstairs, and he lives in the downtown Los Angeles area, so we walk downstairs, and I get about midway through crossing the street, and immediately in the middle of the street, the world ends for me. Just everything goes, boo, and I'm in the middle of on 7th Street, just in the middle of downtown, and cars are whizzing by, and I can't move. And then I just start projectile vomiting horribly, all over myself, all over the ground. And then they drag me into a nearby restaurant where they are trying to get me, and I'm vomiting and I'm completely weak. So now I'm just a ragdoll Batman with a cape wrapped around my neck. They hit my head up against the bar. So then I almost get knocked out on the way up. So now I'm being knocked out, drug upstairs, and puking on myself in a Batman costume. And so then I puked for a while longer. And then they finally took me out, and then I couldn't stop puking long enough to get into a taxi, so we couldn't get back because every time they tried to put me in a taxi, I kept puking. Long story short is, don't smoke weed. Just don't do it. Even if you enjoy it, don't do it because you might wind up puking all over your goddamn Batman costume. Happy Halloween, kids.
Greatest thing to ever happen to horror, period.
I would think the greatest thing that ever happened to horror movies was James Whale or Todd Browning. Because if you go back and look at those films, I mean, they're still phenomenal. No, the greatest thing that ever happened to horror movies, I take that back, even though this goes along with, is Lon Chaney. Horror movies would probably not even exist without Lon Chaney.
Senior?
Well, of course. Would you have Jack Pierce? Would you have Rick Baker? Would you have any of these people if Lon Chaney hadn't existed? I don't know. Think of those. You look at those makeups now of Quasimodo or the Phantom or, this Dead Legs from West of Zanzibar or anything. It's just phenomenal, the stuff he did. And The Unknown, I rented out this theater in LA that used to be there called the Silent Movie Theater, and we screened The Unknown. And to watch those movies on a big screen, and this is the best thing we did. It was just me and my wife. We rented the theater. It was for her birthday. And we had this old guy, he was in his 90s, playing accompaniment to The Unknown. And we were talking to him afterwards. He was like 95 years old. He goes, I played accompaniment to it when it premiered. He was 13 years old, and he was still playing. So cool. Like, it's like unbelievable. And I said, well, do you have a score that you play? He goes, no, I improvise a different score for every showing.